Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us for another edition of Hold My Drink, where we navigate the news and politics with a chaser of civility. I'm your host, Jen, inviting you to grab your favorite beverage, sit back, and imagine with us how to create a new American identity together. Welcome to this week's Hold My Drink and Counterweight podcast with my co host, David Bertstein. Today we have Debbie Hayton with us. And Debbie is a physics teacher, a trade unionist, a journalist, a prolific writer. We have a lot of stuff to discuss. Debbie, thank you for joining us today. And before we get started, first question is, did we bring anything to drink for this conversation? Debbie, did you bring anything to the table? I know it's
I
late
brought
there.
I brought a beer. It's about the
Nice.
third of the evening. Yes, it's quite late.
We have some catching up to do then.
Yeah.
David, what about you?
This is very embarrassing, but I'm not even sure, Debbie, you know what this is, a Diet Mountain Dew. And I thought about lying about it and saying it was some kind of elaborate drink, but this is sort of an anti-lying show. So I decided to be honest and authentic. But that's what I'm drinking. That's what we had in the house.
Mountain Dew, that is just like that's I don't know. I don't know.
That's
Well,
retro in a way.
yeah, I'm catching up with Debbie because I've got my typical glass of pinot noir. So Debbie, I'm with you here. Um, so Debbie, you have gotten yourself. There's been some controversy about some of the things that you write about and some of the issues that you stand for. So really, I think my first question for you is, who is Debbie Hayton? And where do you stand in this world, particularly in relationship to a lot of the transgender communication and conversation?
Well, I'm Debbie Hayton. As you said before, I'm a teacher. I'm a trade union officer. I live a normal life. Uh, I transitioned male to female in 2012, so that's getting on for 10 years ago.
Okay.
And my aim was to keep my job and to stay out of the newspapers. That was the aim, which kind of worked for about 4 or 5 years. And then I got increasingly concerned about some of the activism that I was seeing, which I thought was counterproductive, unhelpful, and based upon things that were wrong. So I started opening my mouth and refused to shut it.
So what would you say, what was it about? So it's been about 10 years since you transitioned approximately, but you said about 4 or 5 years you kept your mouth shut. What do you think in the past 4 to 5 years that really, I mean, you said there was a couple of things that you saw going on. What's happening in our world that has created this new conversation?
Yeah, things changed quite a lot. Around 5 or 6 years ago, some people mark it by Caitlyn Jenner's transition.
Mm.
It sort of hit the newspapers. We lived in the shadows until then. That nobody really cared too much about us, what we were up to, and I transitioned really to improve my mental health. It had got worse and worse and worse and worse, and this is what I read. This was a way of solving psychological issues, and I did, and it all worked out. But it was a personal thing which I did to improve my mental health. It then became something almost like a civil rights issue. It had been a medical issue, a clinical issue until about 5 or 6 years ago. Then it blew up and became a huge thing.
Mm.
And I wasn't really quite sure why, but other campaigners were campaigning with, just this sense of entitlement, which was huge. Rather than, saying that, not that just, we're here to be treated not less favorably than anybody else, just to get on with life, keep our jobs, bring up our families. Suddenly there seemed to be more of a sense of entitlement, that people felt that the universe revolved around them, which I didn't think was good, and I opened my mouth to object to it.
And then you haven't you keep writing and to this day, I mean, you've become quite a prolific writer on the, particularly on the trans issue. I'd love to hear a little bit more about Caitlyn, your ideas on Caitlyn Jenner. I mean, that's something here in the U.S. You know, she's running now for governor. It's governor. Yeah, she and she's caught her own uh, pushback, if you will. What are your thoughts on her and how what waves she's making in the United States?
Yeah, I wrote about Caitlyn Jenner
Mhm.
last week, actually, because of the comments about sport. And Caitlyn's absolutely right, you know, when in those comments about sport. And people who have thought about the situation tend to come to the same conclusions. You know, there's other people in history. There was Rennie Richards, who was one of the few transsexuals that I'd heard of when I was growing up. And Rennie played on the female tennis circuit in the 1970s, but now has come to say that really only got away, you know, it worked because by the time that Rennie transitioned, they were, you know, they passed their prime. But, you know, she'd said that if she was playing in a prime, there was no way that women would be able to match her. And these things, everybody knows this, but
Right.
people don't want to open their mouths and talk about it because you're just in danger of upsetting people. And and the people who you're going to upset, when they do get upset, you know about it. And most people want a quiet life, I guess, so they don't open their mouths. Mm.
What do you think about this? Let's talk about sports in this issue with, yeah, competition. Is there a solution in your mind to this conundrum? And if so, what is it? For so if you are, you know, a trans man, or I'm sorry, trans woman playing sports against you know, other biologically or whatever,
Yeah,
what is the word, natally born, I don't know, I'm not sorry, my
woman's fine.
yeah, what would you say to people who want to? I mean, I think that if you want to play sports, that's great, but should there be a different league? I mean, what are some solutions that we're not even thinking about right now? I mean, it's always like everything in the world, it's either or. You know, you either play or you don't.
Yeah. Well, why do we segregate sports at all? Let's just not segregate. Let everybody play together.
There you go. See, I hadn't
Mm.
even thought of that one.
But one sex isn't going to win very much.
Mm,
And
right.
and there is your problem. The reason why we segregate sports is that to give women fair competition, fair opportunity, and also for matters of safety. Men tend to be bigger, stronger, heavier, and
Right.
so there's a safety issue as well. So that's why we segregate sport. Not for any not to validate anybody's identity, but purely through fairness and safety. So you could say, why segregate sport? Yes, we do have to segregate sport, but how about we retain that open category that everybody can compete in, should they wish to, but then take a separate category for biological females, we call it women's sports. That's what we have, for
Hmm.
goodness sake.
Hmm.
And then in the open category, men can compete in the open category,
Hmm.
but the women's category is closed to biological females, women who haven't taken any advantage through hormone therapy, whatever. So you're left with an open category in which men can compete,
Yeah.
which trans women can compete. Trans men who have taken testosterone can compete, all in the open category, but
Yeah.
you're reserving a separate category for women with biologically female bodies who haven't taken any testosterone. So in that category, you would have trans men who haven't taken any hormone therapy would be quite happy to compete in that category, and that I think is about as fair as what you can get. You could call it open category, female category, whatever, but
Yeah.
it's important to keep that reserved category for biological females because otherwise they're not going to win very much.
Right. And
So
particularly in, oh, sorry, David, I'll just wrap that one up.
go
But
ahead. Sure.
particularly in sports like, you know, where we've seen the most damage, wrestling, that are more contact sports, where we've seen, you know, women, biological women get, you know, very hurt when competing. So I love that idea. That, I mean, that an open category. I mean, it seems so like Eureka Elementary, and we can't seem to even talk about finding that middle ground. I mean, an open category. That's yeah. Okay,
Yeah,
sorry, David.
but sorry.
It's okay. Go ahead. Go
Yeah.
ahead, Debbie.
Yeah, but it's solutions like that that we're looking for. And then you think, where do trans rights come in? As a trans woman, I don't really want to be changing and showering with men. So, if we're looking for trans rights, I am a transgender rights campaigner. What you should be looking for there is separate facilities so that you don't have to change and shower with men. Now that costs money, but that's what I would say is, as trans people, we'll fight for those extra rights. And also, with the best will in the world, the edge. Talk about my performance in sport is has to be seen relatively. Yeah, but you could argue that the edge has been taken off my performance and other trans women who have taken hormone therapy. So have separate record keeping as well. So you'd have the fastest time run by a trans woman whose hormones levels were below a certain level. If you see what I mean. So you are asking something of society. You are saying, look, we want you to build some extra training facilities here, and we want you to record these extra stats, extra records. But we're not imposing on another group that needs protecting, which is women.
So I want to see if we can nail down some terminology here. So we agree that there's something called biological sex, that you're born a male or a female, and that that doesn't change because you go through an operation or hormonal therapy treatments. That said, one can argue, and many do, that gender, which is not the same as biological sex, is socially constructed. And so therefore, one can say, I've changed my gender from male to female or female to male, and that you should respect that because you should be a respectful human being. And if I tell you that I've changed my gender from male to female, you should honor that. How does that comport with your thinking?
Well, what do you mean by this gender? What is this gender, David? You talk about changing gender. What do you do to change your gender?
Well, if gender is socially constructed, and I think there's an argument, by the way, of whether it's partially socially constructed, completely socially constructed, not socially constructed at all, completely a derivative of biology. But let's say it is socially constructed for a second, then you might say, well, if it is, then it's something that you are assigned at birth that happens to correspond with your biological sex, but it's also separate from your biological sex. And if you feel you're female and you live like a female, then why does society have a vested interest in calling you a male? And
But
why can't?
how can you feel female? What does this mean? But I'm playing a bit of devil's advocate
Yeah,
here.
sure.
When I transitioned 10 years ago, I thought I was some kind of woman. I really did. I wouldn't have done it otherwise. I had this idea that inside my head I had a female brain, female soul, whatever you want to call it. And that gave me almost permission to myself to transition. But it's nonsense.
So you don't feel female?
No, I just feel like me. I can only know my own experience of living in my own body.
Can you describe that a little bit? Like, what do you feel now when it comes to sort of gender valence? Can you give some expression to that?
I just feel like me, and
Uh-huh.
to say that you feel, this was the challenge that was often asked of me. What does it mean to say that you're a woman, Debbie? I feel happier being treated as a woman. So how do we then need to treat you as a woman? Do we need to what do we have to do differently? How do we treat men and women differently? And if you're not careful, you end up being defined by I'd say gender or sexist stereotypes, and that's what you end up being defined by. And I don't think it's healthy. I think that as individuals, we shouldn't be restricted by sexist stereotypes, and we shouldn't be restricted by the expectations we have on ourselves and other people have on us about how we should present on the basis of our sex. So as a male person, yeah, as a man, if you want to call me a man, it doesn't bother me. I should be able to grow my hair long. I should be able to wear dresses. I should be able to, as an adult, modify my body so that it more closely resembles a woman's body, and I'm much more comfortable with it like this. But it doesn't mean that I'm female or I feel female. I've no
Right.
idea what it feels like to feel female.
But let's say so that you're giving voice to your own personal experience, but there might be somebody else who's trans who does feel, or say at least, if they feel female or male. Should, I guess the question is, for the rest of us who didn't experience gender dysphoria, who haven't gone through such a transition in life, should we respect their self-definition in that way, what they ask to be called in the way that they ask to be thought of? How would you, what would you say to those of us who have no dog in this fight, in a way? Like, I have no reason to deny you your self-definition if in fact you want to be called female, even if you were natally a male.
Yeah, you see, the situation seems to change completely. When I transitioned, the test of a successful transition was the sex people took you for in the street. When you went up to a stranger, uh, and you were talking to people who didn't know you, which pronouns would they use naturally? Would they use male pronouns or female pronouns? And you knew you were doing something right if they used female pronouns. So you thought, oh, I'm doing something right here.
Hmm.
Being directed to the bathrooms as well. That was another thing. So if you just ask
Mm.
them, where's the bathrooms? They would direct you to the women's rather than the men's. That also was a test. And but what that was, it was observations of how you were actually presenting to the world. Whereas we seem to be in a position now where people don't change the way they present to the world. So they don't necessarily make that change themselves, but they demand that other people change the way they think. And that's very different. And for somebody who comes along and says, I demand that you treat me in the same way as you basically, you give me female pronouns and you treat me the same way as a woman, you assume I'm a woman, and I'm not going to I'm not going to change the way I present to the world. I'm certainly not going to change my body at all. Then that puts everybody else in a really big form of cognitive dissonance,
Mm.
and it's a big ask to ask the rest of the world to change their way of thinking to uh, to help you out without making that effort yourself to meet society halfway.
Mm.
So when people say, these are my pronouns, I you do try to you do try to be kind to people, but it's not easy, and I wouldn't expect it to be easy. And if people get it wrong, and sometimes people use both pronouns for me. Some people call me she, her. Some people call me he, him. I'm past the point of caring, actually. For
Mm.
me, what matters to me is how I feel about myself, how I feel about my body, and I'm comfortable with that. That's what I transition for me to feel comfortable with my own body. What everybody else thinks is
Right.
secondary.
So go
If I
ahead.
was relying on other people to validate me, then you're really vulnerable to anybody who doesn't want to play along.
Mm. So we have a friend, Jennifer and I, Xander Keeg, who is a transgender male, natal female, as he would say. He's very open about these issues. He's not one of the people who tries to impose an ideology on everyone else. He helps us sort of think about it in nuanced ways. And and Xander looks very much like a natal male. I mean, big beard, balding, voice is deep. I've only known Xander as a male, and I can't, even if I tried, think of Xander as a female. And if Xander asked me to think of to use the pronouns he, him, first of all, I don't just, there's nothing about Xander that makes me think otherwise. And so I guess the question is it, you said meet halfway, and I'm just trying to figure out what that looks like. I mean, I agree, by the way, we should be exercise, show some grace ourselves in how we talk about a person who wants to be called a female or a male. and perhaps they should show some grace to people who may not get it exactly right. We're human beings. We're not we're not machines, and we can't just flip a switch and pretend that we view something a certain way when we don't. But isn't there some demand that we can place on people to try to be sensitive to this person who wants to define themselves in a certain way, and over time allow ourselves put the onus on ourselves to adjust to that reality?
Well, I guess what you say with Xander is it would be completely unnatural to use female pronouns because it would be, it is what you see in front of you, and that's the way. That's the way that it always used to be. I was talking about, one of the tests that was so that in most situations in everyday life, people would use she/her pronouns for me because it's easier. It fits it fits what they see in front of them, so it works. It makes the rest of life easier. Now, if you've got a situation where somebody is male, looks like a male, gives all the impression of being a male, but then says, I demand that you use she/her pronouns, that just makes it really difficult for everybody else. And it's only going to be a matter of time before somebody messes up because people try to be kind, but you've got a million and one other things to do in life as well, rather than be just thinking about somebody's pronouns.
Right.
And and people, and I just feel for people in this situation. They've said, these are my pronouns, please use them, and then people keep messing up, and it must be almost in a situation where they're waiting for people to mess up, and how you're not going to have much in the way of confidence and security at all. So I just feel people are setting themselves up for disappointment.
Right. And
And
it's not a good social model for change either. If people feel that they're walking on eggshells or that they could be slammed at any moment, it doesn't give them an opportunity to get to know you, to humanize you, and then to change their thinking in a more organic way either.
yeah, yeah,
Um,
I I hate it when people, because it's become a point now where once people realise that you're trans, they desperately not to upset you, and they will walk on eggshells around you, and I hate it. I'm a human being, and I've got interests well away from being trans, and I just
right.
want to be treated like a
Right.
human being, not
Right.
as not as something to be wrapped in cotton wool.
Can I ask one more question, Jennifer? Okay.
Please.
So I know you've written a lot about children going through therapy, hormonal therapy early, or even parents allowing their 4-year-old to be thought of as the opposite gender and raising them in that way. Um, it gets tricky when your teenager starts to ask about becoming another, going through a transition. At what point, um, what should the process be for parents who are struggling through this, about when they might allow their teen to explore or go to the next level, getting hormonal therapy? How do you think about those issues?
Right. I think I am going to use it. I was a bit nasty to you before, David, about gender, about saying what it is. But we all know about how we express ourselves, and we know what that means. I think that children should be able to express themselves, how they feel comfortable. But we shouldn't be telling children that they're really the opposite sex. And I think it's regressive. I think we should be bringing children up. If a girl wants to, this is stereotypical, if a girl wants to go and climb trees, play with trucks, run around, playing football, then let her do that. Don't tell her that she's really a boy, and vice versa. We as human beings, we're varied. We're all different, and we shouldn't be fitting into boxes. Now, what worries me is that children very young who are gender non-conforming do concern their parents, and gender non-conforming children have already have always concerned parents because they worry about children not fitting in. But I worry that this transgender movement has produced this pre-packed solution to turn your gender non-conforming daughter into your gender conforming son, and I don't think that's helpful. I think it's taking people from one box into another when we should be letting children be free to be themselves. The concern about going down a route which heads towards medication and surgery is the impact on long-term impact on health. We don't know what the impact is going to have. Certainly on fertility. To take away somebody's ability or potential to have their own children before they're a grown adult just seems to me to be wholly irresponsible to be actually making these treatments available. I think it's wrong, and historical studies have shown that children who are struggling with their sex, prefer to be the other sex, between 60 and 90% of them desist. It goes away by itself. There's studies to show that. But children who have been put on have been affirmed young and then get medication to block their puberty, they don't, because they're almost like on a treadmill through, and there's very difficult for them to step off this. And it's not something that I think we should be doing. I worry as well is in that the actual, the identification itself doesn't actually seem to improve people's mental health. The reason I transitioned was to improve my mental health, and it did. Whereas there are children, and it has been documented, where the gender dysphoria, the mental distress follows transgender identification. There's something wrong going on here, and we shouldn't be throwing drugs and potential surgeries at children before they've grown up and know what it means to be an adult.
Just want to ask a quick follow-up on that. There's also the argument, of course, that puberty blockers prevent, especially a natal male, from developing such male characteristics that their later transition is less convincing to them, convincing to others, and therefore you're harming their future ability to live in the way that they want. What do you think of that?
It doesn't harm mine. I'm quite tall. I'm 6 foot, so I can see over crowds. I like that. I like being tall. My voice is deep, but other than that, things get on fine. But one thing which children do need to be aware of is that to go through a full transition and have male to female gender surgery, the surgeon needs some spare parts to work with. And if the child never goes through puberty, those spare parts actually never develop to the size which they need to get to. Mm. And the surgical techniques have been developed for adults, and it's become routine. Now, the story of Jazz Jennings, the American teenager, when you look at what Jazz went through, because Jazz never had the tissue, which I did. It involved various bits of abdominal tissue, and it didn't work very well. Mm. So there is something about male puberty going through it. Yes, it makes me taller. Yes, it makes my voice deeper, but it had advantages in other ways as a trans woman now.
Understood.
Debbie, I want to hear more about you. So you decided, speaking of transition, I think this is a good segue. I mean, you decided later on, for mental health issues, which I think is really, I'd love to hear more about that you just felt better in the world identifying as a female. But for a good part of your life, more of your life than identifying as a female, you were male, and you have children as well. Was there something outside of just like a kind of a depression or mental health question? Was there something for you that was a turning point?
The turning point was when my life collapsed, was realizing that other people were transitioning, and I could too. When it was something which just it didn't seem possible. I heard of people transition. It was something I desperately wanted to do from when I was very young, actually.
Okay.
But it was just something that was not possible. People like me didn't transition. People like me went to school, got a job, had a family. That's what we did. This the transsexualism I read about was esoteric, distant things that happened on the television. Whereas it was when I found that people were transitioning, people I knew, and the internet allows you to get to know people who are transitioning.
Mhm.
So the rise of social media around 12, 13 years ago, that opened up those doors to me, allowed me to see that other people were transitioning, and I thought, I want that too. And it became an insatiable need at that point, and that's when I had to transition.
Well, and you said something, I wrote this down because it was really actually, again, a very simple question, but it kind of blew my mind. Is when David asked you, how you felt, you're like, I only can speak for myself. I can only speak for Debbie. But, what does it feel like to be female? I mean, here I am as a female, and I'm like, that's a brilliant question. I mean, I don't know what it feels like when I really think about it from a philosophical position. I mean, I feel from a societal position, there is a certain feeling, if you will, to being female. A lot of it around things like sports and whatnot, and kind of more physical attributes of size and whatnot. But I don't know that my brain actually. I mean, I can't jump into a guy's brain and see whether or not we're thinking different thoughts. I would say for me, and so many of my friends, obviously being male, um, I one thing that I would think, and I don't know if this is biological or just happens to be a Jennifer thing that's different, but I would say my brain, I find that the men that I know are much more able to compartmentalize thoughts, so they can go like, something that happened earlier today that was upsetting, they can put it in a box and take it out later, whereas I feel like women, I always call myself like a noodle brain, where I just feel like everything's going on, like, we're thinking about, or at least for me, my kids doing this, my parents are doing this, I've got this going on, work's going here, and it's all in this big like soup together. But again, is that I don't know if that's Jennifer, and the men that I happen to be with are more compartmentalized like that. But I just found that question fascinating. What does it even feel like to be a female brain? But you, at some point, said, I feel better for my mental health identifying as a female. So I want to push that question back to you again. Was there something outside of like people recognizing you as a female, calling you the pronouns that you felt comfortable with? Was there something identifying with female that made you really come into your own, into who you are, who Debbie Hayton is? Does that make sense? I feel like I noodled around a lot of issues there, but I'm still working it out in my brain too. Because when you ask that question, what does it mean to be a female? I'm like, holy crap! I mean,
That's a lot of questions.
I know. I'm sorry. I kind of like did some like verbal like spewing at you, but
there's definitely differences between the way that women interact with each other and with men, and the way that men interact with each other and with men. And as a teacher, I see children, playing in the yard, and girls tend to interact differently to boys from a very young age. This isn't teenage hormones. When you're looking at really little children of 4 and 5, you can look at children and you think, I bet that's a girl, I bet that's a boy, the way that they interact. But there is overlap. There are boys who there's boys who are quiet and there's girls who are very active. So there is overlap. We can't use this as a way of saying, oh, you're a boy because of this and you're a girl because of this. It's so there are trends, I guess, but that doesn't characterize you, and it doesn't define you as a man or a woman. And I'm the same as I always was. If you analyse me, Jennifer, I compartmentalise well. I do all those man things just the same way as I always did, and I still do them. That's so. In terms of how I think, it's stereotypically male rather than stereotypically female. So it was something different to that.
I'm an expert compartmentalizer, just saying.
Well, I'm the only noodle brain in this conversation. That's
you're
awesome.
the only noodle brain in this conversation. Right. Yes. So I still struggle with how the trans issue became such a centerpiece of the current social discourse and the sort of ideologically charged culture wars of our time. In some ways, I understand race and racism. That's been around a long time. It's been sort of the the Achilles heel of American society and many other societies. It seems like the transition almost came out of nowhere and almost competes for our mind share today as one of the contentious issues. I mean, we have another guest who's trans. You're our third in the last couple months. So obviously, it's got currency, and I don't know. I mean, I don't know why. Is it that there are trans activists who are demanding things that society is not ready to provide? Is it that society is denying trans people the sort of self-actualization that they aspire? How would you describe the reason why this issue has gotten such currency overnight?
Well, it's bizarre. I'm not denied anything really. The law in the UK where I live is very it's very good to trans people. We can't be treated less favourably. We can't be sacked from our jobs for being trans. We can't be denied goods and services. The police are quite concerned about transphobic abuse. They will investigate that. Life's really good for trans people. It really is. So it's quite bizarre when I hear about people feeling, the most downtrodden group of people, suffering major oppression. I don't. It doesn't happen. I do have privilege. I recognise that. I'm white. I speak English. I'm educated. I'm professional. I'm, in my early 50s. I am at the pinnacle of privilege in Western society. And then I transitioned and I got even more because suddenly, and then, people do tread on eggshells around me. They want to know what I'm thinking about. If I hadn't transitioned, I wouldn't be speaking here. I wouldn't be writing articles in the press. So by transition, I got even more privilege. So that's the truth. But then we also hear male to female, other male to female trans people who are then claiming to be some sort of victims in this. And that brings you an awful lot of power. If somebody who is very privileged can then play the victim, then suddenly they are very powerful because nobody can challenge them, nobody can upset them, nobody can disagree with them at times for fear of divine retribution. So this is really quite attractive to people, and it tends to be the male to female side. It's your trans man friend. It's different. This is a movement which is being driven by males who have privilege and get even more privilege, and then claim to be some sort of victim, and then the world dances around them. No wonder it's become a big thing. It is a vehicle to even more privilege.
Mm. Yes, it still mystifies me why on both sides it seems so blood. There are people when I look at what might come out of a right wing outlet that like a media outlet that insists that these are men pretending to be women, or then I see that stores like Target then refuse to carry Abigail Schreier's book. I just think there's so much discourse in between these extremes that is not being heard in society. It seems like the only people willing to challenge radical trans ideology are right-wing conservatives. So that's the argument that we hear, which to me seems a bit insensitive. And on the other hand, then we hear trans ideologues talk about, why it's transphobic to deny a 14-year-old therapy. So I feel like we need to give voice to people who are able to articulate a bit of a third way. We're sort of sorely missing that discourse in society now, and I'm grateful, by the way, that you're one of those voices. You're not there to to deny people their dignity, and you're not there to impose your views on others. And I think that's very refreshing.
Okay, there is different. The politics in the US is different to the politics in the UK.
How so?
Yeah, what would you
Uh,
say the biggest part of that is?
there was a group of left-wing trade unionist women 4 years ago who started campaigning on this. So it's not the same left-right issue in the UK as it is in the US. Although our left-wing parties have become they've become very unfriendly to people with views like mine. And although I'm a member of the Labour Party, I'm in this is me. But we don't have the same partisan left right divide on it. So we have thinkers on the left in the UK who are, I would say, a rational scientific thinkers who, yes, are saying that trans people should be treated with dignity and respect. Their rights should be protected. We should go the extra mile if they, to provide, as I said, about the sporting facilities. Yes, let's spend some money. Let's spend some money here. So there are people there now. I've not picked up the same in the US, where it does seem to be much more polarized, and the people who are standing against the ideology, some of them are standing against trans people as well, which is different to what we see here.
That's interesting. I want to go back to something that we were talking about with biological differences. So my question, going back to kind of like the male female brain, do you think, outside of the physical differences that are obvious, do you think that there are biological differences in the way males and females, their brains work at all, or is that just, it doesn't matter, it's all the individual?
Yeah, there's differences in the way that everybody's brain works, because we're all individuals. We're all unique individuals. But on every, I hate to use the word spectrum. I don't want to use that. But on every axis, there is a spread. There's a male spread, and there's a female. The spread of females, and the two overlap. But there are biases. There are biases. One in Jungian psychology, or what the Myers-Briggs has picked up, that in Myers-Briggs speak, women, 2/3 of women are F preference and 1/3 are T, and T preference, and in men it's the other way around. Now I'm a T preference, my wife's a T preference, so it doesn't always fit. But whenever you get a large group of women and a large group of men, the average will be in two different places. And I think we all know that. But those differences.
What are you on Myers-Briggs, now that you've mentioned it?
I'm an ISTJ.
ISTJ. Wow, that's not a common profile, I don't think. ISTJ. Interesting.
We talked about this the other day. I'm INFP. So again, what you were just saying, so for people who aren't Myers-Briggs, to translate, the F is for feeling, and the T is for thinking. So what you're saying is, typically, not typically, because again, we're all individuals, and that part I truly believe in. But you would say more women fall on the F feeling spectrum of the Myers-Briggs, and men fell on the T or thinking. Yeah. Well, and I am an IFP. But what are you again, David? You are.
I am an ENTP.
Okay, so you two
very typical ENTP, by the way. I mean,
I know that. Yeah, you are. He is. He's the extrovert of us.
I have two sons. One is ENTP, and the other one is INFP.
Oh my gosh! So he's me. We are. He's me. I didn't mean
soulmates.
We're soulmates. I mean that's fascinating. But so I guess that goes though to my question. I mean, if you are going to stereotype, and generalization and stereotype is what I'm doing here. I acknowledge that from the get-go. But women would be more considered in the feeling, physical aside, if you're talking about brains and emotions, feeling and thinking. And so I guess that kind of addresses my question. I mean, we're all individuals.
Is that really a stereotype? I guess I'm going to push back on you, Jennifer.
Go.
Is that a stereotype, or is that sort of a tendency that exists in among females. I mean, and it, as Debbie was saying, if I'll use the word spectrum, if you won't, if there's a spectrum for each sex, and there's overlaps, it would be accurate to say that there's a majority of females who are like this, and there's a majority of men who are like that. But there are men and women on both extremes that don't abide by those majority traits.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think we should be willing to talk about these biological realities. It's clearly gender. Look, I think is at least partially socially constructed. I mean, there are aspects of gender that are assigned by society. I think if dolls and trucks, I mean, probably have some social valence. But then again, it's no accident that boys play a certain way and that girls play a certain way, and that you see that cross culturally as well. So I think we have to become nuanced enough to be able to say something can be both biologically determined to a degree and socially determined to a degree, and we have to just figure out what the percentages are, and it might differ from individual to individual even.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And we should be giving children the same opportunities, offering them the same opportunities, the same experiences, whether they're boys or girls. And yeah, but the way in which children interact with each other, that doesn't determine their sex. Their sex is purely determined by their biology.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah, I feel like some of the pushback, David, to you, people not wanting to define biological differences in our personalities or what outside the physical, there is this sense, I believe, like we were talking about the Briggs Meyer, sorry.
Myers-Briggs.
Myers. Okay, my getting tongue tied with my wine. But I mean that there is almost a hierarchy, right? So if you're feeling, that's not as good as thinking, and that's where I have a problem. Is I love being a woman. I love being, the feeling type. Like I have no problem with that. So to me, it's kind of breaking that hierarchy down, where it's okay to have these biological differences and still have the same access to I don't know what to say, access to just general humanity,
Respect for each other's differences.
dignity, yes,
right.
And value. Correct.
Right. We need all of the above. We need people who are thinkers. We need people who are feelers. Dominant, by the way, I feel too. I'm a T. But society is better off when we sort of respect these differences in our fundamental attitudes and behaviors.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's, I guess, maybe we need to expand our understanding of diversity. I mean, I think Myers-Briggs is one way of thinking about it. I think, obviously, expanded understanding of what gender might be is a way of thinking about it. Certainly, our viewpoints and our intellectual differences and our ideological differences are another way of thinking about diversity. And I think we'll be a better society if we all sort of expand what we mean when we say diversity, and we don't just think about it in these very narrow terms that the current ideological discourse imposes on us.
Well, that's just
you agree, or is that just a rant?
No. I think that the thing is that we don't have conversations like this that often. Because what we talked about at the very beginning, we walk on eggshells. Like, did I say this right? Were you offended? I mean, we're just we're hypersensitive, and we live in a offense culture. Where, Debbie, you mentioned this, I mean, I think that there is some power to be gained sometimes in being offended, and so we don't have these genuine conversations. It's just easier not to.
Yeah, if I can get my way by being offended, there's power there, and these conversations aren't happening, and just because people are concerned about, and for good reasons. The people don't want to upset other people, so we'll not have the conversation. But only by having the conversation to actually explore what it means to be human, rather than trying to guess what it means to be human. We need to talk about these things. And being able to, one thing we need to hold on to is we need to be able to talk, and we need to be able to disagree with each other while respecting each other. And that seems to be something which we're losing.
Yes.
It's important, is that?
Yes. Yes.
Right.
That is one of my favorite quotes. I forgot who said it, but something along the lines of, just because I disagree with you doesn't mean I hate you, kind of but that's where we're at. That's where we're at.
Yeah, we need a no more eggshells campaign. I just feel, yesterday I was on a podcast with three African Americans, and one of the hosts said, "I can't stand it when white people feel like they have to walk around eggshells. It's dehumanizing to me when they do that. It's an exercise of power if I were to force them to do that. And it means that they're not seeing me as another human being. And I think in general, we're losing that in this current ideological environment. I mean, I learn much better when I'm able to experiment with my thoughts and my words than if I feel like I'm confined to a specific discourse that insists I speak a certain way and think a certain way. And I'm much more likely in some ways to understand you as a human being if you allow me to say something that might not adhere to a predetermined discourse. And it feels good to have those conversations. I feel richer for it and more human. So thank you for that.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's Debbie. It's a pleasure to get to know you. I hope this is the first of many conversations. And I guess my last question for you is, what's next? I mean, you're a physics teacher. That's awesome. I'm a chemistry person myself, but you're writing. Is there a book coming up? Is there what's up next on your agenda?
Well, I always think I couldn't possibly write any more on this. But there's always more. There's something crazy will happen, and it takes me by surprise. And I think, well, surely I've written about everything that can be written, but then something else will happen. And
then Jonathan Yaniv shows up on the scene, right?
Well, yeah, Yaniv is there, and
or is it
yes,
right?
and there will be others.
Right.
We've there's been issues just this week where and children are the biggest concern of mine. Where there was a family on daytime TV in the UK. They didn't have the kids with them, but their 2-year-old came out as trans, and they were so proud of this child at this age. I'm thinking this is just not right. And to be able to try and write about that without demonizing the parents is quite tricky, because you have to call it. I think it's wrong, so I'll call it out as wrong, but without demonizing the parents.
Yeah, that's a fine line.
But I do have a book I wrote, and I can't get it published. The LGBT press. It was a book about my own experiences. It's autobiographical, and actually going through my experiences of gender surgery. It was a bigger mental. It had more mental impact on me than I ever thought it would do. And I kept a detailed diary at the time, journal at the time, and while I was recovering from surgery, my task was to I wrote it all up, but. At that time, that was going back about 5-6 years, and publishers were interested. But the more the more controversial my other work was, the less they were interested in this. And it's difficult, I could try trying to market it again, but yeah. People talk about saying, well, you should put your thoughts in about this campaign in some sort of logical sequence in a book, because the trouble is I've written about 150,000 words, so I've written plenty, but I can't remember where I've written it. People will say, you wrote about this. I can't remember where it is. So a book would be useful, but it's finding the time to do it. Life is busy. On top of this campaigning, I've got, I'm teaching, I'm representing my colleagues, I've got a life to live, and
right.
There's a lot going on.
Well, I hope you keep on writing and speaking.
Yeah.
You're a really important voice out there.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Hold My Drink. Like or subscribe to the show and check out the show notes for links to source material and to our website, where you can find what each of us is reading every week, different news with different views. If you have a topic that you would like us to explore, drop us a line. And join us next week as we say, hold my drink, and the conversation gets real.